Welcome in, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We'll get started in a few minutes. If you can't see the slides, we also have a slide up right now that says to please make sure to change your Zoom name to your full name with which you've registered so that we can issue professional development credits. Thanks for joining us. If you're just joining, we would ask you to please make sure to change your Zoom name to the name with which you registered so that we can issue your professional development credits. We also have a question in the chat if you'd like to introduce yourself and a little bit about your school role and location. We'll get started in about a minute. I don't know if it's just me, but I see these little lines on Sarah or Sam on the screen. It's like the whiteboard turned on. And I was trying to figure out how to remove that.
On the shared slides.
Yeah, there's like two lines right there that showed up.
Oh,
It's like a whiteboard.
let me see. Give me a second.
Thank you. Welcome in, everyone. We ask that you change your name, your Zoom name, so we can match it to the registration for professional development credits. And we have a question in the chat if you'd like to introduce yourself, your role, your location. All right. Thank you. If you could just hit the next slide for me, please, Sarah. Well, get started. I know we're letting in a few more people and we'll continue doing that, but my name is Ria Predican, she, her, Shah, and I'm a learning resources educator with the Cyrus Tong Foundation here at the Field Museum. And I'll hand it over to my partner on the project.
Hi, I'm Samantha Chaplow, she, her, and I am the school partnership educator working on this project as well. So I work directly with the students and the teachers as well.
And we wanted to give you an overview of our time together. We're going to go through some opening moves. We'll have an introduction by Grace Chan McKibben. We will have a presentation of advocacy by Grace Pye, a panel discussion with our students, implementation, Q&A, and then some closing moves and resources. And for our session objective for today, we want to provide you with a brief overview of the TEACH Act, how it was passed in April 2021, explore the struggle to pass legislation, and reflect on how the TEACH Act, both its presence and absence, has impacted young people by listening to a panel discussion, and equip you with the tools from the Field Museum and AANHPI organizations that you could weave into your classrooms and communities throughout the school year in order to meet the requirements of the TEACH Act. We want to acknowledge first with our land acknowledgement that the museum recognizes that the region we now call Chicago was the traditional homeland of many indigenous nations and remains home to diverse Native people today. The land we walk was and remains Native land. We are all on Native land. We also want to acknowledge that this professional development, TEACH Act from advocacy to implementation, is made possible by the generous support of the Cyrus Tong Foundation, which funds the project, the AANHPI project that Sam and I are on. We'd also like to thank Asian Americans Advancing Justice Chicago and Coalition for a Better Chinese American Community. We also want to recognize that October is Filipino American History Month, and this is the first time that the Field Museum has celebrated Filipino American History Month. We had 4 public-facing events this past month, and this is one of our virtual public-facing events that we hosted and closing out our celebration with this event. So thank you for being here. I'd like to now introduce our moderator, Ms. Grace Chan McKibben. She is the Executive Director at the Coalition for a Better Chinese American Community, which seeks to empower the Chinese American communities in Greater Chicago through planning, advocacy, and organizing. And Sarah's picture is not on there, but Sarah Tang has been a great part of organizing this and getting everyone together to make this panel happen. So we're really grateful for your support, Sarah. So thank you. And I will now hand it over to Grace Chan McKibben.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ria. Just as an addendum, Sarah Tang is Assistant Director for Programs for CBCAC, and we are indeed grateful for her help in coordinating this panel in this session. And I'm going to introduce the panelists. Grace Pye is the Executive Director of Asian Americans Advancing Justice Chicago, and she leads strategy for issue-based campaigns and power building work. And in the context of this session, Grace was the chief architect that worked on the legislative work for the TEACH Act. And then I'd like to introduce 3 young people who were involved in TEACH Act, either on the legislative side or on the implementation side, or both. Olivia Lee is an incoming freshman at Grinnell College studying chemistry and economics. She serves as a youth leader at Hana Center's Suburban Youth Council and also Canwin Elevate. Then we have Anna Yang, who's a senior at Illinois Math and Science Academy, my youngest son's alma mater. Since 2022, she has been with Hana Center as a member of the Suburban Youth Council, and Anna is deeply committed to closing gaps in education and culture for AAPI communities. And finally, we have Jarajo, or Jay Lobo. He is an incoming senior at Lane Tech High School. And he works as a youth leader and community navigator for the Indo-American Center and is a Kinetic Core leader. Kinetic is a program with Asian Americans Advancing Justice Chicago. He became involved with advocacy for the TEACH Act in 8th grade and has worked with the implementation side as well. So I'd like to turn the time over to Grace Pye to talk about the advocacy piece and how that got to work from advocacy to implementation. Thank you, Grace.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone for joining today. We just want to provide a little bit of context for how this bill became law and the critical role that community advocates played in its passage. So the Pan-Asian Voter Empowerment Coalition is a diverse coalition of 18 Asian American organizations that are committed to fostering meaningful collaboration across the AAPI community and advocating for policy change that will impact the lives of Asian Americans across the state. We do that both through increasing voter turnout and civic participation and advocating for an annual shared legislative agenda in the state capital of Springfield. The TEAACH Act amended the Illinois School Code to require a unit of Asian American history be taught in all public schools. This was the first piece of legislation in the country to require Asian American history across public education. So it was a really exciting moment that kind of came after a wave of increases in anti-Asian racism and the tragic Atlanta spa shootings that really rocked our community and that brought increased spotlight and attention to the Asian American community. We first, as the PAVE Coalition, drafted bill language in 2020, but of course, this was right before the pandemic. And so with the impacts of COVID-19, not only was the legislature not meeting in Springfield, they put everything on pause, but also our communities were trying to figure out how to respond, right? How to support each other and make sure that people had their basic needs met. So although we had bill language ready to go, and although community members were really excited to launch this campaign, we did kind of put things on pause. In 2020, we approached our Senate sponsor, State Senator Ram Vilivalam, the only Asian American member of the Illinois Senate. But we, kind of jointly decided that this was not the right time to move the bill forward. And so we waited until 2021 when the legislature was back in session to introduce the bill in the House and the Senate with or under the sponsorship of State Representative Jennifer Gong Gershowitz. And so, because the kind of main advocacy and main push behind the bill came after we had seen a lot of the attention on anti-Asian violence and the kind of impacts of COVID in the anti-Asian racism sense, it really helped the bill move forward quickly. And so from January until May, that's kind of all it took to pass the bill through both chambers. And the Atlanta spa shootings actually happened the night before a committee vote on the TEAACH Act in the House. And so in that sense, that kind of accelerated that crisis, really accelerated some of the political support for this bill and helped it sail through both chambers. To give you a sense of kind of how this campaign came to fruition and why it was able to move forward so quickly, it wasn't just the crisis moment, but also that community members and organizations that are part of the PAVE Coalition were able to come together and had built a really strong campaign. So our tactics included legislative outreach, of course, talking to state legislators and making sure that they knew what this bill was about, but also focusing on changing the narrative through media outreach and op-eds and other community education, and mobilizing community members. We needed to demonstrate broad-based support for the TEAACH Act, and we did that both through grassroots outreach and also coalition building to ask organizations that are not focused on the Asian American community to also support this bill. Here are a few examples of some of the media change and narrative work. This is in the top left is Bailey Huang, a high school student who penned an op-ed that was published in the Daily Herald. And in terms of our impact, we were able to engage more than 20 volunteer leaders across the coalition, volunteer leaders who did things like leading lobby meetings or reaching out to coalition partners to get endorsements or, training, providing community education workshops to other community members. We also collected 65 personal testimonies, and as part of our narrative campaign, we worked with some artists to illustrate those testimonies, and an example of that is pictured here on this slide. We also did broader outreach and sent text messages to 15,000 Illinois voters. I'm sure all of you are getting, inundated with text messages from various political campaigns. It's a very common tactic to reach out to people, but it can also be used for issue-based campaigns. We wanted people to learn about the TEAACH Act, and so we texted voters as a way of increasing awareness. And that helped us mobilize over 1,000 witness slips in support of the bill and 860 almost emails from constituents to their legislators, because legislators hearing from an actual constituent is a really impactful and important way to sway their opinion on something. In terms of implementation, since the bill was signed into law in July of 2021, Advancing Justice Chicago has worked to provide free professional development workshops for educators. Unfortunately, we just wrapped up these, but being here is a great way to get connected to a lot of the amazing resources that are out there. There are so many wonderful institutions, from the Field Museum to others, that are continuing to provide educator resources. So we did this just for, this kind of 2.5-year period. And we launched the Asian American Education Resource Database, which you can still access on our website, which is shown here on this slide, which was kind of crowdsourced, but also vetted by a team of volunteers, community organizations, and educators to really put a lot of resources in one place. But I will say, to go to the next slide, we have been really excited. Sorry, one more. I'm really excited to help transform this database into a nicer looking resource, and one that is wider in scope, called the API History Hub. This is in partnership with the Asian American Foundation, and they developed this much more interactive resource where you can create an account, log in, save resources. And this builds on the work of our Asian American Education Resource Database. And so a lot of the resources that we included in our database are linked here, in addition to others from other contributing organizations. So in terms of impact through implementation, we've trained more than 2,600 educators across the state, and even some from other states who were interested in figuring out how to bring this content to their classrooms. And we've held almost 150 PDs in partnership with a variety of different entities, from individual school districts or schools to regional offices of education or higher ed institutions to reach pre-service teachers, and also education organizations and museums. I did want to just kind of finally share this resource on lessons learned from advocacy, because, our hope is that people, whether they're educators or people in other states, advocates who are interested in passing something similar, can learn from our efforts here in Illinois. And so again, with the Asian American Foundation, Advancing Justice Chicago co-authored this report that really distills a lot of lessons about and breaks down how we went about our advocacy in more detail than we'll cover in this presentation today, and also lessons that we learned about what helps to set up an effort like this for success, and what were key elements or key players that were involved in this effort. So I'll drop these links in the chat once we wrap up. But I believe that's it for me. So thank you so much for your time and for joining today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Grace. We're going to move into our panel discussion next. And first, I want to ask our youth. This question is for Anna and Olivia. Why did you become involved, and why did you decide to become involved in the TEAACH Act campaign? So first, Anna.
Actually, first, could we stop sharing the screen really quick? And then just so I could present. There we go. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Grace, for the introduction. It's an honor to speak here on behalf of many youth who has been working for the TEAACH Act. To share my story, I decided to become involved with the TEAACH Act because I saw firsthand how the lack of Asian American history in school curriculums affected not only me, but my fellow peers' sense of identity and understanding of our heritage. In schools, we are being taught the same content since middle school, such as Japanese American internment during World War II, or Immigration Acts for the Chinese Exclusion Act. like that, which are, of course, very important, but there is so much more to history that we can acknowledge and highlight beyond those typical ones. I wanted to ensure that the future generations would have the opportunity to learn about the contributions and struggles of the AAPI community in a deeper and more diverse level, which are often overlooked. By advocating for this change, I hope to foster a more inclusive and accurate education system. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anna. Olivia, same question. Why did you become involved in the TEAACH Act campaign?
Thank you. So much like Anna, I also saw firsthand how the impact of the lack of Asian American history was in both my community and on my peers kind of across the country. I talked to my family members and friends that go to schools not only in Chicago but in other states, and I could tell that there was a lack of understanding for Asian Americans of their own heritage and their families. And actually in 2021, I did hear about the act being passed, and I didn't really know how to get involved, even though I was super passionate about it. And I actually brought up the fact that it wasn't really being implemented to teachers at my high school. I attended Stevenson High School in Lincolnshire, Illinois, and the reasoning that came back was that it was too long to really implement it in the time that it had just been passed, and there also wasn't much of an ask for Asian American history to be implemented, and I struggled to find a lot of peers who were really interested in it. So my junior year, I found out that Hana Center was running a cohort of youth around the suburbs, and so I got involved through that because I found really like-minded individuals who wanted to make sure that the classroom was a representative space.
Yeah, thank you so much, Olivia. Turning back to Grace Pie here, both the advocacy and the implementation involved multiple groups. Asian Americans Advancing Justice is the coordinator of the PAVE Coalition, the Pan-Asian Voter Empowerment Coalition, which includes more than a dozen organizations across different ethnic groups. How did you coordinate with other groups? How did it work with forming a coalition?
Yeah, definitely. The PAVE Coalition has been working together for more than a decade. And so having that past experience of collaboration and, collective action around legislative campaigns was really helpful in working towards the TEAACH Act. But what we found was that, there are other organizations that work in the Asian American community or organize with Asian American individuals who were not part of the PAVE Coalition, but who had opinions and feedback on how we were moving forward with the campaign. And so, in an effort to be inclusive of those voices, even though we didn't have the same history of collaboration, we had to have some difficult conversations, honestly, about points of disagreement or ways that people, felt that the legislation should be written differently. And so we did have to work through those challenges. But really, I feel that we came out stronger for it because we were able to build a broader base of support for the legislation and address, some of the concerns that other community members had. And, just to kind of briefly share, one of the primary concerns was that the largest ethnic groups in the state of Illinois, including the Chinese American community and the Filipino American community, that they were not named specifically, as communities within the bill. And that was an intentional, choice on our part as the PAVE Coalition to kind of not lift up individual ethnic communities. But at the same time, in the original language, we had chosen to highlight the issue of Japanese American incarceration during World War II for some various reasons, that we thought would help us gain more legislative support and potentially bipartisan support. But ultimately, so that we didn't, we weren't highlighting any ethnic group, we ended up removing all references to specific Asian American ethnic groups so that we could address those concerns and really, aim for a broad representation of the diversity of the Asian American community in implementation, rather than sort of sending the message to educators that there are certain ethnic groups that they should check off and others that they don't need to pay attention to. And so, the Asian American community is extremely diverse. There are, dozens of countries within Asia that all have different migration histories to the United States and different factors, pushing and pulling them to the US. And so, in our resources, like in the Asian American Education Resource Database, we group the resources based on which sort of regional ethnicities are represented so that educators can try to include resources from a variety of regional ethnicities. For example, East Asian, South Asian, Southeast Asian, so that you're not picking 3 East Asian resources, but instead could think about picking 1 East Asian resource, 1 Southeast Asian, 1 South Asian, 1 Pacific Islander, as a way of really demonstrating the diversity of the API community in your classroom.
Yeah, thank you so much, Grace. And that was an excellent summary of what happened with the coalition building, as well as some of the complexities that's involved. So I want to turn it back to the youth to talk about what you've been involved in. So the tactics that you've used or the strategies that you've used as youth organizers, and what are the things that worked with the audiences you're trying to engage. And this question is for Jay and for Anna. We'll start with Jay.
Hi, I just want to say thank you so much. And yeah, I think for me, the tactics that I really used were, personal accounts and, sharing those personal experiences. What I was working on with TEACH was I got to talk to some state representatives and some legislators to try to convince them to, co-sponsor the bill. And so basically what I really got to accentuate and really I got to tell my story. And so I got to say my experiences growing up with a lack of Asian American history being taught in my school, and how that made my peers view me and how alone that could make me feel. And just kind of like spreading that message that I didn't want other students to have to face that, and that TEACH could really make that change, create a more inclusive environment, a more educated environment. And so, yeah, really those personal stories and statements were like the driving force for a tactic on how to get this bill recognized.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jay. And Anna?
Yeah, I agree with Jay. Storytelling, personal anecdotes are super important. But another way I think I engaged TEAACH Act with my peers was by creating interactive workshops or really using social media to amplify our message. When the HANA Center Suburban Youth Council created our survey that Olivia will later elaborate on, we promoted on social media through our Instagram account, which really helped engage a lot more interactions. We found that, like Jay said, sharing personal experiences of the lack of representation in school curriculums really resonated with our fellow youth audience. And we also made sure to collaborate with local schools and community organizations to really speak on this and take action. Oh, and then another thing that I wanted to mention was we try to do more in-person interactions through canvassing, like ringing doorbells to local houses in the community that have that feed into high schools and schools with the Asian American population. And yeah, those are some ways that I was involved.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing about the importance of sharing stories and importance of social media and personal interactions. What does it mean for the youth organizers? Is not common that that campaigns involve young people, and I think that is great that that we intentionally included youth, high school as well as college youth in organizing for this. Just wanted to ask what it means to you to be the core organizers for this bill. What was rewarding and what was hard? And this question is for Jay first and then Olivia.
Yeah, I mean, it really meant the world to me to be a part of this journey, because especially because I was 12 when I started it. And so I was really new to the world of social work. I was really new to this world of activism. And to me, this was just like a great way to make change, which is something I'd always wanted to do. I saw the struggles that I went through, my sister went through as Asian American kids in, a small Catholic school in a predominantly white area. And so I was like, I want to see that change in the future, and I can be a huge part of that change. So it really did mean the world to me. And I think it was difficult though because I felt really surrounded by people older than me. And so it was a little intimidating. It was pretty scary when I started, but I think I had a really great support system. The people at Asian American Advancing Justice Chicago really helped me in my journey. I know Grace was a part of that, and a couple others, and so it was just really helpful. It set a great standard for what I wanted to accomplish in my future and in my present. And so, yeah, it really was an awesome experience, and I'm so glad I can still be a part of this.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. Olivia?
It was definitely a really empowering experience. So I go to a school that has a pretty large Asian American population. So it really felt like it was necessary because um I would say that understanding another community's history is really important to understanding the people that come from that community. And so when there's a lack of Asian American history, it makes it really hard for our non-Asian peers to understand where we come from, in our experiences. And so it was really rewarding to be able to be part of the process and push schools to really implement it into their curriculums. But it was also hard because um, I think as a youth, adults don't necessarily always want to listen to what you have to say, because with all the experience that they've had with school and just life experience, I think it can feel like it's not as important to listen to students um who haven't necessarily had that much experience yet just yet. So I think that was definitely really hard to communicate with adults, but it was really rewarding to work with the people with other youth and people who are open to working with us.
Yeah, thank you, Olivia. Want to switch back to Grace Pie for a minute about looking forward. So how does the bill help carry the community forward? This is the first, the Illinois TEACH Act is the first bill that was passed for a state to teach Asian American history in all K through 12 schools, but it wasn't the last. They're, created the momentum for other states as well. So go ahead.
Absolutely. I think we really were the beginning of a national movement to teach Asian American history in public schools and to really ensure that all-inclusive history curriculum efforts are truly inclusive, that we're not just advocating for one community at a time, right? Which is how it came to be that Asian American history was left out of the Illinois school code when there are other requirements for Black history, LGBTQ history, right? Holocaust and genocide study. But that other states can look to what we've accomplished here. And if their states don't have any inclusive curriculum mandates, that they can take a broader approach, right, and advocate for Asian American history alongside the histories of other marginalized communities. Or if Asian American history is the missing piece to fill that gap. And so we've been really excited to see and support efforts in other states like New Jersey and Connecticut that have been successful, and to support, organizations in other states that have not passed bills yet or have to start, on the more local level, places like Ohio and Minnesota, for example, or Wisconsin. Here in the Midwest, our focus is kind of focusing on the region where we have relationships, which is the Midwest. But certainly there are efforts all across the country, from coast to coast to ensure that Asian American history is included. And, I just want to point out too, I know we'll talk a little bit more about this when Olivia talks about implementation, but that legislation is not the only way to advocate for our histories to be included in classrooms, that it's really important that, wherever you are, that you can advocate, even just by including Asian American history resources in your own classroom or advocating for your schools in your school's administration or in your district, for there to be, a more structured approach to incorporating Asian American history, there are lots of these local efforts happening all over. And as much as implementation is a huge uphill battle, I also really believe in the power of just individuals taking action in their local communities and really helping to increase the number of people who are taking on this responsibility of teaching Asian American history and teaching it well.
Yeah, thank you, Grace. Before we turn over to Olivia for more in-depth discussion of implementation, I want to just have a wrap-up question for this round, and that is, what is the most important thing to keep in mind when coalition building? Yeah, I'll say a little bit about, what I found is important. As Grace had alluded to earlier, there were some groups that were not specifically involved in the PAVE coalition and were not involved in drafting the bill, but were later interested. They became very interested in trying to see whether specific groups were included. I know at least in the Chinese American situation, which I was the most familiar with, it really took a bit of effort to make sure that all the different voices are heard and that there was an opportunity for people to discuss. So taking a little bit more time to pause, even though there was momentum to move forward, so that folks have the opportunity to voice their opinions and be able to discuss with each other and listen to each other is really important. And I want to also ask Grace and Jay the same question. What is the most important thing to keep in mind when you are coalition building and organizing? Maybe Jay first and then Grace. Yeah.
Yeah, building off the discussion earlier about how we were working on coalition building in the years prior, I would say unity. I would say it's really based around equality and equity and making sure you're listening to everyone working together, because I feel like that strong community, that strong base leads to a stronger movement and a stronger cause. And so, yeah, I would say that definitely centering the discussion of coalition building around unity and working towards one common goal is just this huge, all encompassing part of how to accomplish set goals.
We have a little bit more time, so maybe I'll have Olivia and Anna also say a little bit about what you think is most important, and then Grace can wrap up this round. Yeah, go ahead, Olivia.
I think something really important is that you need to keep the youth involved. I honestly can't express how important and empowering it felt to be part of the movement. It was something that I had always been kind of passionate about and wanting to be involved with since I was younger. But it was definitely an opportunity that not every organization gives to the youth, and I think it's really important that the youth are involved, just because I think that we have a lot to say, and providing that platform is super, super important.
Go ahead, Anna.
Yeah, I totally agree with Olivia, especially for the TEACH Act, because it's something that ultimately the students will be impacted on and benefit from. I think not only having the students involved, but allowing them to lead and make initiatives rather than them following and just adding, little extra opinions to the adults who are trying to make change. So if you creating platform space that students can express their leadership and really lead that themselves, I think creates a huge change.
Yeah, I'll just build on that to say that, I think in community organizing and advocacy work, the principle that these youth are describing, is essentially that the people who are most impacted by any given issue should be the ones determining what change looks like or what solutions to propose. And in this case, right, it's youth, it's people who are in the classroom learning or not learning, as the case may be, certain histories. But, on other issues like language access, it's people whose first language is not English or people who face language barriers, or on immigration issues, right? People who are not citizens or have, just experienced migration, which in itself is a, really challenging process. And so I think that principle guides a lot of coalition building to make sure that coalitions that are advocating for change really have that accountability and representation of people who are most impacted by whatever policy issue is being considered. And I would say, one of the common tropes about the Asian American community, one of the, typical narratives or stereotypes is that of the model minority myth, which really positions Asian Americans as the, quote unquote, good minority, and creates a contrast or kind of implies that if there's a good minority, there must be a bad minority. And Asian Americans have often been used as a community that divides other communities of color. We see it very recently in the debate around affirmative action. And that's despite the fact that a majority of Asian Americans actually support affirmative action, but certain Asian Americans have been sort of cherry picked by other conservative forces to really be the face of an anti-affirmative action campaign. So that's one example of Asian Americans being used, in the kind of broader context to divide communities of color. But we've also seen it in countless other examples throughout history. And so I think when teaching about the Asian American community, it's really important to keep that myth, and it is a myth, in mind, that there is a reason why Asian Americans have been portrayed as, a quote unquote hardworking, studious, category of people, and that it is not at all inherent, but is in fact deeply rooted in our country's immigration history and who was let in to this country and who was not, and why it's been so hard for Asian Americans to come to the U.S. For many years, although that has changed in the last 50 years or 70 years, but that the reason for these tropes are explainable, right? That they are in our history. And so not to play into that, when teaching about the Asian American community. So I think, that kind of broader context is why it's important for us to build multiracial coalitions that really counter that notion that Asian Americans are sort of separate from other communities of color. And so that's why I share that in this context.
Yeah, thank you so much, Grace. I want to turn over to Olivia for her presentation on the implementation, in particular the survey that she conducted. So Olivia.
Thank you. Okay, so if we could go to the next slide, please. So I was part of Hana Center's Suburban Youth Council. For short, it's called SIC. And this is a picture of a portion of our survey that we conducted across the Chicago suburbs. So we received about 113 responses, and we canvassed across the Glenbrook South, Glenbrook North neighborhood, Stevenson neighborhoods, Niles West, and Niles North, and a few other neighborhoods as well. But most of our responses came from students and teachers. And so we asked questions like, are you aware of the Teaching Equitable Asian American Community History Act? Are you aware? And what topics do you want to hear? And if you've been aware of it, what impact are you seeing in the classroom? And to our next slide, here's some data. And about 40 respondents said that no, yes, they had heard about it. It was 36% of respondents saying that they had heard about the TEAACH Act versus a 73 that did not. And it was extremely concerning to hear about this due to the fact that when these acts are passed, it's the responsibility of the schools to be communicating what's being taught to the students. And so we were really concerned by this statistic. And then on that, we saw that only 27 students said that one unit of Asian American history had been taught in 2022 to 2023 school year, versus the 73% who had said that they had not received any. So looking on that, we took our results and we took them to the schools. We had a liaison at each school. So I worked at Stevenson, and there were two other students that were working at Glenbrook South and Niles West. And we spoke to the principals, we spoke to the superintendents. We spoke to the curriculum directors and the teachers. And we asked the teachers and the curriculum directors and the superintendents, are you aware of the TEACH Act? And upon speaking to a superintendent, they had said that they were not aware of the TEACH Act. They did not know really what it was. Actually, we had a conversation, and it had continued where they thought it was something that had sprung off another mandate. However, to see that our own educators were not well educated on the bill language and that the mandate was specifically about teaching one unit of Asian American history, we were really concerned by the fact that our own school districts didn't know how to really implement it. And I think Grace Pye mentioned this earlier, but the bill language was kept vague so that schools could really interpret how they wanted to put this into their curriculums, whether or not that was teaching it through a select number of topics or that was incorporating a book into their curriculum. And so we saw that the two topics that really arose out of these curriculums was that it was Japanese internment and Chinese Exclusion Act. And students responded with the fact that they wanted to see more positive history that really reflected the Asian American community. We are not just a community that has been victimized, but there have been moments where we have really shown our own point to really empower the people around us. To hear important history where students can see that the Asian American community has really made an impact is really important for the development of identity. And because we realized that about 69% of teachers did not receive training or professional development to prepare them to teach Asian American history, whether that was in their undergrad or graduate school, or even past that in school, that was really concerning to hear that many teachers weren't getting more training to teach the students in their classrooms. So the implementation process in total was disheartening, to say the least. I think that I can speak on behalf of the Suburban Youth Council to see that the results came out that many students didn't see true implementation in their classrooms was really harmful, and it really reflected to us that how we were feeling about the curriculum was true. We were seeing that schools weren't really taking our feelings or our history into account or prioritizing it. And so that is really important leading on. Schools need to really implement it. So we provided them with a bunch of different resources, such as the Asian Americans Advancing Justice sheet that listed several different curriculum topics. And off of that, schools were saying, well, we have a mandate for these different topics, like the LGBTQ community. We have to talk about the Native Americans, and we don't really have all that time to talk about all these different communities. So we can't really go beyond Japanese internment and Chinese exclusion. However, we all know that there are multiple different topics, and Grace Pye provided multiple different resources, and there will be more resources provided at the very end of this as well, further proving that there is more opportunities for Asian American history to be taught, and that we can't use other mandates to excuse why we shouldn't teach Asian American history. Thank you.
For this detailed explanation of the survey and the results. I think we have time for Q&A, and I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to lead this part. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you everyone for sharing your story and showing what's possible for our community and beyond. So now we can go into a time of Q&A. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. We had a pre-submission question. So the first one we have in the chat is what lessons have you experienced as a student since the passage of the TEACH Act? I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can see everyone. So, Anna, would you like to kick us off? What lessons have you experienced as a student since the passage?
Yeah, I think I learned the importance of the broader world of advocacy since the passage of the TEACH Act. Really the importance of persistence and collaboration, making sure that advocacy isn't just about speaking up about a cause for a day or on special occasions, but really every day, even when we're not being highlighted to the public, to make this change and realizing that education is crucial in shaping our cultural understanding, and it's not something that we can just learn from mouth to mouth and hear and just kind of get small influences from our surroundings, but it's something that we need to be taught professionally and has because that's the reason students go to school. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, passing it to me. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I think that lessons that I've experienced, like, yeah, kind of on that broad general sense, I feel like we've talked a lot more about these lessons, which is what's really important to me. So I feel like we went more in depth on, Japanese internment and the Chinese Exclusion Act, as well as colonialism in the Philippines and in the Pacific Islands. And so that was really huge for me. I feel like that's not something that's often covered. And I'm really seeing a lot more of that, talking about, like different Pacific Islands and the history of colonialism there. And so I feel like that's a really huge shift that we're seeing. And so, and how that relates to then immigration with Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders that have come here to America. And yeah, I mean, I think that to me, it's really important. It makes me super happy to see because, it just means a lot to me because education, again, leads to acceptance or just like a general awareness. And that's really important, especially because, as Grace was talking about earlier, the model minority myth, it kind of pits Asians against other, specifically Asian Americans, against other people of color. And I feel like this is really bridging that divide, showing, here are the struggles that Asian Americans have went through, but also here are their successes, and here are ways that we can connect as a larger community. And I feel like that's been really important and really awesome to see.
Thank you, Jay. Olivia, can you tell us a bit about the lessons that you've learned?
Yeah, some of the lessons that I've learned about since the Teach Act, well, I'm not in high school anymore, so I'm not necessarily affected by this act anymore. So I haven't really been seeing the classroom effects. But I was able to work with one of the teachers from Stevenson on curriculum building over the summer, after we had met with them over the past year. And we got to really walk through how they build different lessons. So we've been able to see how we can implement more topics into the conversations they're having with students. And that was really rewarding, especially to see how they're being built and how we can really see how teachers can really find ways to really add them in. And I think it really further proved to me that if there's a will, there's a way. So there's definitely ways that teachers can really put them into their curriculums, despite how strict maybe the AP curriculum is and other built curriculums that teachers have to follow.
Thank you, Olivia. We have a follow-up question on the survey. Anna, would you like to take that? So would you do a
Yeah,
follow-up survey for 2023 to 2024?
Yeah, as a current suburban youth council member, I am happy to talk about this with my team. I think it'd be really effective to do a follow-up survey for this year and hopefully gather more respondents and more diverse opinions. So yes, I will try to get back to the team on that. And another comment from Laura about how did all adults stay out of this while supporting our work. Just wanted to respond to that real quick. For the entire implementation for in creating the survey, each one of the questions were brainstormed by a group of high school youth. We created a survey, we promoted them ourselves, our peers, our teachers, to the community around us. We promoted it on our social media by creating posts. And then canvassing was all through high schoolers. Really, the only way adults supported was us were they helped us, whether it was transportation or reaching out to specific adults that could have been harder to reach out to, things like that. So, yeah, I think these are totally things youth could do themselves. And yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Anna, for
Right.
sure. Olivia, go ahead.
Yeah.
Answer the same question.
I don't want to necessarily phrase it as adults stayed out of our work. I think that for youth to do work, it's really important that adults are there to support them. I want to make a quick shout out to Malian. She was one of the youth organizers at Hana Center. And she was really important for us to really work with implementation. When we had the idea to talk about further implementation of the TEAACH Act, she helped us build the community survey. So we as the youth, we brainstormed and we created ourselves, but she was able to help us refine it, put it together, and then look at the survey data that came out of the survey, and then rationalize what we were seeing. And then from there, we also prepared to work with school boards and with other students and other teachers. And that was really important to have an adult there too, to be there as a support figure. And she was there also to help us run through questions. Inhe Choi, who is the current executive director of Hana Center, was also there to look at our presentation. And I don't want to say nitpick, but she was able to really finally comb through our presentation and tell us exactly what needed to be more improved, how we could be better presenters, and really communicate with the adults we were speaking with. So I wouldn't want to say that adults were staying out of the work, because adults were definitely really important for the work to continue. But adults did support students and really empower us to use our voices. So I think what was really key was that adults were there to show us that as youth, we were fully capable of communicating with adults about our needs and our wants for the TEAACH Act implementation.
Thank you, Olivia. Yeah, definitely removing barriers and putting tools in the hands of the youth is very important. Jay, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just kind of agreeing with both of what Olivia and Anna said, is just like this idea that, the adults need to be there to support the kids, but then also to step back and listen to them, I think is the biggest point. I feel like a struggle with a lot of youth work is that sometimes youth voices just get overlooked. They're not heard because, as we mentioned earlier, like, haven't lived as much. They don't have those same experiences. But I feel like that offers a fresh perspective. And so what I feel like was done really well while working on TEACH and like the implementation was that adults not only listened but also supported and stepped in when it was needed. And I feel like that was really the combining factor that was really helpful.
Thank you, Jay. We have another question in the chat. What would you like to see happen next, either on the part of the classroom teachers or in terms of advocacy? Or if this is entirely new for a teacher, where should they start? Is anyone happy to take that? Grace Pie, Grace Chan, anyone?
Sure. I was just waiting to see if any of the youth wanted to jump in on that.
Thank you.
I think if this was entirely new for a teacher, I would say, go to any one of these kind of either the resources that I linked in the chat, these compilations of lesson plans or book recommendations or other resources, and identify like 3 to 5 topics that fit into your existing curricula, right? Like, it's not that you have to teach just 1 day or 2 days only focus on Asian American history. The reality is that Asian American history is connected to all of the other content that we're already teaching, right? That students are already learning. And so how can you add in an Asian American story? For example, if you have a unit on the farm worker movement and Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, how can you add in Larry Itliong and other Filipino farm workers who are really crucial in that movement? Or if you're teaching about I don't know, what's another good example? School segregation, for example. How can you also include the story of Mamie Tate and her Chinese American family that fought for Chinese American students to be allowed to go to the white-only schools in the 1800s, right? There are these parallels that can connect Asian American stories and Asian American experiences in history to other critical themes that are often already covered in school, right, in the classroom in some way. So I would, try to think of it that way of how can you add in one or two things related to Asian Americans into your existing lesson plans rather than creating something wholly new, which I think can feel a lot more overwhelming and, kind of contribute to the not knowing where to start.
Yeah,
Thank you.
would agree. And I think that for folks that are completely brand new to adding Asian American history content, just look at any of the survey resources that Grace Pi has suggested. PBS has a series on Asian American history where there are episodes as well as accompanying lesson plans. So you might want to, start there and add some resources to what you already have. And then what in terms of what would like to see happen next, I think if there's additional funding that can be added, I think Grace Pi had alluded to wanting to advocate in the Illinois state legislature for funding for implementation, not just of the Asian American history curriculum, but of the different ethnic history and as well as LGBT history curriculum, because there isn't enough money to do all the professional development. And then in terms of other states, we definitely would like to support other states that have started their advocacy. We've seen some successes, but I think that there are states where it is much more difficult. So I think that in terms of what we'd like to see next is really supporting the states for which teaching any kind of cultural history is difficult. And we know that there's a lot of backlash in some of the southern states. So I think that whatever y'all can do to support them would be very helpful as well.
Thank you, Grace. We just have 3 minutes remaining, so I'm going to pass it back to Sam for closing, and I'll share the screen.
Yep, so we just have a few resources for you. Next slide, if you have one quick reminder. So if you signed up to get professional development credit, what we're going to do is we will mark your attendance in PD Plus, and then we'll send a follow-up email to confirm that we have done that. Attendance will be marked by the end of the day on Friday, so just kind of know that, we have a couple of days in between there. To receive your credits for that, you're going to need to complete an evaluation online by logging into your PD Plus on ISB. I will resend those instructions again in another email to you. Just know that we no longer internally send any kind of certificate of completion. You will get that, when you log in there. Advance the slide now. So here's a nice little link for you, but you also have these resources at the end of your participant agenda, including that QR code, because that document will be updated continuously. It has lesson plans from us. So it has our lesson plan actually on Larry Itliong. So I was very happy that you mentioned that. It has links to lots of different field museum resources and also to resources from our partner organizations like Asian Americans Advancing Justice. So that link to that Airtable is in there. I will definitely add the hub in there as well. So lots of different resources for you, including ways to sign up for more professional development and also for us to come and do student workshops in your classroom. So we'd like to definitely get some more of those on the books for the spring and would love to see you. One more slide. And of course, evaluation. So we would love your feedback on your experience today, what you're excited to use and implement in your own classroom. If you're traveling, don't worry, I will also send the link to this in the email as well so that you can complete it later. And we just can't thank you enough for being with us today.
Thank you all. Thanks to our panelists, our moderators, and for all our participants. Thank you.
Thanks, Rhea. Thanks, Sam.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.